Hanson. My name is Marshall, and I am 62 years old. After my wife died 25 years ago, while I raised our son Thomas all by myself. I worked 2 jobs, put him through college, and gave him everything. Last month at his wedding, he demanded I sign over my house as a gift. When I refused, he had security escort me out in front of everyone. I left in tears, humiliated and broken. But what happened next changed everything. Let me know where you are watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and join me as I share how I taught my son a lesson about family he will never forget. The day my wife Sarah died was the day I truly understood what it meant to have your heart ripped out of your chest. Cancer took her quickly, leaving me alone with our 12-year-old son, Thomas. I remember standing at her funeral, holding Thomas's small hand in mine, both of us drowning in grief, but somehow still breathing. "It's just you and me now, buddy," I told him that night as I tucked him into bed. "But we are going to be okay." And we were, somehow. I worked as a mechanic during the day and picked up night shifts at the local warehouse to make ends meet. Our little 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago became our sanctuary. It was not fancy by any means, but Sarah and I had bought it together when we first got married. Every corner held memories of hers. The kitchen where she would dance while making Sunday pancakes. The backyard where she planted her beloved rose garden. The living room where we would all cuddle on the couch for movie nights. I never even considered selling it, despite the financial strain. This house was the only physical connection Thomas had left to his mother. It was the only tangible piece of her I could give him. Dating was never a priority for me after Sarah. A few well-meaning friends tried to set me up years later, but my heart was never in it. Thomas became my whole world. I wanted to make sure he never felt the absence of his mother more than he already did. We had some good years, Thomas and I. I taught him how to change the oil in a car when he was 14. We went fishing most weekends at Lake Michigan, just the 2 of us in a small rented boat talking about school friends, and sometimes when he was ready about Sarah. I kept her memory alive for him, telling stories about how she could name every constellation in the night sky, how she would leave little love notes in my lunchbox, how her laugh could fill a room. "Your mom would be so proud of you," I would tell him. And I meant it. Thomas was a good kid, smart and kind. He made the honor roll, consistently played baseball, and had a solid group of friends. When Thomas got accepted to Northwestern University to study business, I could not have been prouder. I had been saving for his education since the day he was born, but college costs had skyrocketed beyond what I had anticipated. To cover the difference, I picked up extra shifts and sold my beloved vintage Mustang that I had been restoring for years. "Dad, you did not have to do that," Thomas said when he found out about the car. "Your future is more important than any car," I told him. This is what parents do. The change in Thomas did not happen overnight. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. During his freshman year, he would come home most weekends bringing his laundry and raiding the fridge, but always sitting with me on Sunday evenings to watch football games, just like we always had. By his sophomore year, the visits became less frequent. He joined a fraternity and made new friends, which I understood. College was about expanding horizons after all. When he did come home, he seemed different, more concerned with appearances. He complained about our outdated television, made comments about the worn furniture, and seemed embarrassed when his new friends dropped him off. "You should consider updating this place, Dad," he would say, looking around with critical eyes that reminded me nothing of the boy who once built pillow forts in the living room. By junior year, our communication had dwindled to occasional phone calls, usually when he needed money for textbooks or fraternity dues. I always sent what I could, even if it meant cutting back on my own expenses. I told myself this was normal, that he was just growing up and finding his independence. It was during his senior year that Thomas first mentioned Julie. He called me on a rare Sunday afternoon, sounding more animated than he had in months. "Dad, I met someone. She is amazing. Her name is Julie Walker." I was thrilled to hear the excitement in his voice. As he spoke about Julie, I could tell he was truly smitten. She was studying marketing, loved tennis, and according to Thomas, was the smartest person in any room. Her dad is a big-time investment banker. Thomas added a hint of something I could not quite place in his voice. They have this amazing house on the North Shore. It was not until the first time Thomas brought Julie home for dinner that I began to sense the real change in my son. Julie was beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that even I could tell were expensive. She was polite enough, but I caught the slight grimace when she entered our modest home, the way her eyes darted around, assessing everything. "Thomas tells me you are a mechanic," she said over dinner, her voice pleasant, but holding an undertone that made me feel as though she was really saying, "Just a mechanic." "Yes, going on 30 years now," I replied with a smile. "I love fixing things." "That is nice," she said, exchanging a look with Thomas that made my heart sink a little. "My father always says there is dignity in all forms of work." The condescension was clear, but I let it slide. If Thomas loved her, I would make an effort. But as the evening wore on, I noticed how Thomas seemed to distance himself from our shared history. When I brought up our fishing trips, he quickly changed the subject. When I mentioned his mother, he grew tense. It was as though he was trying to present a different version of himself to Julie, one that did not include our simple life together. After that visit, Thomas called less frequently. When he did, Julie was often the subject. Her family vacations in Europe, her father's connections, the internship she had secured for him at a prestigious firm through her father's network. My son was being pulled into a world I could not access, and it seemed he was eager to leave his old life behind. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in May, nearly a year after Thomas had graduated and moved to downtown Chicago for his new job at Walker Financial, where Julie's father had secured him a position. "Dad, I have some news," Thomas said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "I asked Julie to marry me. She said yes. Despite my misgivings about the changes in my son, I was genuinely happy for him. Marriage was a sacred commitment, one I had cherished with Sarah." "That is wonderful news, son," I said, feeling a surge of hope that perhaps this new chapter would bring Thomas back into my life more fully. "I am so happy for you both." "Her parents are throwing us an engagement party next weekend," Thomas continued, "at their country club. You will come, right?" "Of course I will," I assured him. The Willow Creek Country Club was unlike any place I had ever been. Sprawling greens, a massive clubhouse with marble floors, and staff dressed better than I was in my Sunday best. I felt out of place the moment I stepped through the doors, tugging awkwardly at the collar of my only suit, now slightly too tight around the middle. The Walkers were exactly as I had imagined them. Harold Walker was tall and imposing, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile not reaching his eyes as he assessed me. "So, you are Thomas's father," he said, more statement than question. "Thomas speaks very highly of how you raised him on your own." His wife Margaret was elegant and cold, her blonde hair pulled back in a sophisticated updo that matched her daughter's. She air-kissed my cheek and immediately turned to greet someone she deemed more important. Throughout the evening, I was introduced as Thomas's father, the mechanic, with a tone that made it clear this was considered an amusing novelty. I overheard Harold telling his friends, "Thomas came from very humble beginnings, shows what the right influences and opportunities can do." Thomas barely spent any time with me, too busy mingling with Julie's extended family and her father's business associates. When he did approach me, it was with Julie on his arm. Dad, we need to talk about the wedding, he said, his voice hushed. Julie and I want something special. Of course, I nodded, eager to be included in the planning. Whatever you need. The thing is, Thomas continued, glancing at Julie, a wedding like we want is not inexpensive. Julie's parents are covering most of it, but they think it would be appropriate if you contributed too. I have some savings. I offered immediately, wanting to do my part. How much were you thinking? The number Thomas mentioned made my stomach drop. $50,000. Almost all of my retirement savings. That is a lot of money, son, I said carefully. Julie's parents are spending 10 times that, Thomas replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. It is going to be at the Peninsula Hotel downtown. 300 guests. I looked between my son and his fiancée, seeing the expectation in their eyes. I thought of all the extra shifts, all the careful budgeting I had done over the years. But I also thought of Thomas, my only child, and his big day. All right, I agreed finally. I will make it work. The relief and happiness on Thomas's face almost made it worth it. Almost. Over the next few months, I saw very little of Thomas as the wedding plans consumed all his time. When I did see him, it was usually to discuss some financial aspect of the wedding, or to meet with various vendors who all seemed to look at me with thinly veiled condescension. It was 3 months before the wedding when Thomas and Julie came to my house for dinner. I had spent all day cleaning and cooking, wanting to make a good impression. Julie's grimace when she entered had not changed, though. Your house is so quaint, she said, running a finger along the bookshelf and checking for dust. Very retro. I chose to take it as a compliment, though I knew it was not intended as one. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee, Thomas cleared his throat. Dad, Julie and I have been thinking about our future, he began. We want to start our married life in the right neighborhood. That makes sense. I nodded. The right start is important. There is this perfect condo in Lincoln Park. Julie jumped in, her eyes lighting up. 2 bedrooms, doorman building close to everything. Sounds nice, I replied, not sure where this was going. The thing is, Thomas continued, with the wedding costs and everything, we cannot quite afford the down payment. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I have already given you what I can, Thomas. We know, Thomas said quickly. But we were thinking, this house, it is just you here and it is way too big for one person. What are you saying? I asked, though I already knew. You could sell this place, Julie said bluntly. Use some of the money to buy yourself a nice little condo, maybe in a retirement community, and help us with our down payment. It makes perfect sense. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. This house, with all its memories of Sarah, all the years of raising Thomas, the garden she had planted, the marks on the wall measuring Thomas's growth. This is my home, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. It was your mother's home. I have no plans to sell it. Thomas's face clouded over. Dad, be reasonable. You are getting older. This place is too much maintenance for you. Think of it as investing in your son's future. I have invested everything in your future, Thomas, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Your education, your upbringing, the wedding money. This house is not just property to me. It is where your mother and I built our life, where we raised you. That is the problem, Julie interjected, not bothering to hide her frustration. You are living in the past. Thomas and I are trying to build our future. A future you can build without taking my home, I said more firmly this time. Thomas stood up abruptly. I did not expect you to be so selfish about this, Dad. After everything Julie's parents are doing for me, for us, I thought you would want to contribute too. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. Thomas, I have given you everything I possibly could your entire life. Except when it really matters, apparently, he snapped back. Come on, Julie. We are wasting our time here. As they headed for the door, Thomas turned back. You know, if you are going to be this difficult about helping us, I am not sure what role you should have in the wedding. What does that mean? I asked, alarmed. It means that traditionally the father of the groom has certain responsibilities. Giving a speech, being in photos, sitting at the head table. But if you are not going to support us fully, maybe we should reconsider those traditions. With that, they left, leaving me standing alone in the house that suddenly felt both too empty and too full of ghosts. The weeks leading up to the wedding were some of the loneliest of my life. Thomas barely communicated with me, and when he did, it was cold and transactional. A text about what color tie I should wear. An email with the schedule for the rehearsal dinner to which I was now only tentatively invited. I tried reaching out multiple times, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate. Thomas, please call me back. We need to talk about this. Son, I love you. I want to be part of your special day. Thomas, this house was your home too. Your mother would want you to remember that. He never responded to the messages about the house or our relationship, only sending terse replies about wedding logistics. A week before the wedding, I received a formal email from Julie copying Thomas. Due to seating arrangements and schedule adjustments, you will not be sitting at the family table during the reception. Please find your assigned table on the attached seating chart. Additionally, we have decided to forego the traditional father of the groom speech to keep the program moving smoothly. I was being erased from my own son's wedding, relegated to the status of a distant acquaintance. Despite everything, I still went shopping for a wedding gift, spending more than I should have on a high-end coffee machine from their registry. I wrote a heartfelt card expressing my love and hopes for their happiness, carefully avoiding any mention of our recent conflict. The day of the wedding arrived bright and clear. The Peninsula Hotel was as grand as I had imagined, with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements larger than my coffee table. I arrived early, dressed in my new suit, the gift carefully wrapped beside me. When I approached the check-in table, the wedding planner consulted her list with a frown. Marshall Wilson, let me see. Yes. You are at table 23. That is in the back near the service entrance. I nodded, swallowing my pride. At least I was still invited. As guests began to arrive, I noticed that table 23 was indeed the farthest from the head table, populated by what appeared to be Julie's most distant relatives and a couple of work acquaintances who seemed equally confused by their placement. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Thomas looked handsome in his tuxedo, and Julie was stunning in a gown that probably cost more than my car. As they exchanged vows, I felt a complex mixture of pride, love, and profound sadness. When the officiant asked who gives this woman to be married, Julie's father stood proudly. When it came time for the mother of the groom to be acknowledged, a moment of silence was observed for Sarah. I was not mentioned at all. At the reception, I tried to make conversation with my table mates, most of whom were more interested in the open bar than in talking to the groom's father. I kept glancing toward the head table where Thomas sat with Julie, her parents, and what appeared to be some of her father's business partners. After dinner, as people began to mingle, I decided to approach Thomas. I wanted to congratulate him properly, to have just one positive moment with my son on his wedding day. As I made my way across the ballroom, I overheard Thomas's voice from behind a large floral arrangement. He was speaking to Julie and another couple I did not recognize. No, he is still being stubborn about the house, Thomas was saying, his voice slightly slurred from champagne. But do not worry, we have other options. I told you we should have just had a lawyer draft something, Julie replied. Make him think he is signing something for the wedding. That is the backup plan. Thomas laughed. Dad is not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. He trusts me completely. I froze, the gift suddenly heavy in my hands. My son was not only dismissing me but actively plotting to deceive me. Is that him? The woman with the mask, nodding in my direction. Thomas turned, his expression changing rapidly from surprise to annoyance. Dad, how long have you been standing there? Long enough, I said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group before Thomas straightened his shoulders and adopted what I recognized as his business persona. Actually, this is perfect timing, he said, his voice carrying enough that nearby guests turned to look. We were just discussing wedding gifts, and Julie and I were wondering if you had reconsidered our proposal about the house. Thomas, this is not the time or place, I said, keeping my voice low. On the contrary, Julie interjected. What better time to give your son a proper wedding gift? Everyone else has been so generous. I looked around, noticing we had attracted attention from nearby guests. I could see Julie's parents watching with interest from across the room. I brought you a gift from your registry, I said, holding out the package. The house is not for sale, Thomas. It never will be. Thomas's face darkened. So you are really going to do this, embarrass me in front of everyone on my wedding day? I am not trying to embarrass anyone, I replied. I am just not giving away the home your mother and I built. My mother has been dead for 25 years, Thomas snapped, his voice rising. Stop using her as an excuse for your selfishness. The room had grown quiet now, all eyes on our confrontation. Julie's father appeared at Thomas's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. Is everything all right here? He asked, his tone deceptively pleasant. No, it is not, Thomas said, his words clipped. My father seems determined to ruin my wedding day by refusing a simple request. A simple request? I repeated incredulously. You want me to give up my home? Harold Walker looked at me with undisguised contempt. I was under the impression that parents generally want to help set their children up for success. Margaret and I have spared no expense for this wedding and for Thomas's career. With all due respect, Mr. Walker, I said, fighting to keep my composure. I have supported my son his entire life. I put him through college. I gave him everything I could. Clearly not everything, Julie muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. Thomas stepped closer to me, his voice low and dangerous. This is your last chance, Dad. Sign over the house as our wedding gift or leave. I looked into my son's eyes, searching for any trace of the boy I had raised, the child who had once curled up beside me for comfort when he missed his mother. All I saw was a stranger, cold and calculating. I cannot do that, Thomas, I said finally. I will always love you, but I cannot give you the house. Thomas's jaw tightened. He turned and signaled to someone, and to my horror, 2 security guards approached. Please escort my father out, Thomas said loudly. He is causing a scene. Thomas, I gasped. You cannot be serious. Completely serious, he replied coldly. If you will not support us properly, you do not need to be here. The security guards each took one of my arms. I did not resist, too shocked to do anything but allow myself to be led toward the exit. As we walked through the ballroom, I was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the phones discreetly recording the spectacle. Is that the groom's father? Did they just kick him out of his own son's wedding? How embarrassing. When we reached the lobby, one of the guards spoke quietly. Sorry about this, sir. Do you need us to call you a cab? I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As I stepped out into the evening air, still clutching the unwanted wedding gift, the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. I had lost my son. Not to death like I had lost Sarah, but to something that felt equally final and perhaps even more painful. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my driveway for nearly an hour, unable to summon the energy to go inside. When I finally did, the house that had always been my sanctuary felt like a mausoleum filled with memories of a family that no longer existed. The days after the wedding passed in a fog. I called in sick to work for the first time in years, unable to face anyone or explain what had happened. I barely ate, barely slept. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, despite the warning signs that I could not seem to process it. On the fourth day, a knock at my door roused me from my stupor. I considered not answering, but the knocking persisted. When I finally opened the door, I found my elderly neighbor Grace standing on my porch with a casserole dish in her hands. "You have not picked up your newspaper in 3 days," she said without preamble. "That is not like you, Marshall. I figured something was wrong." Grace had moved in next door about 10 years ago after her husband passed away. We had developed a neighborly friendship over the years, occasionally sharing meals or helping each other with small household tasks. She was in her 70s now, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life fully lived. "The wedding did not go well," I said, simply stepping aside to let her in. My house was a mess, dishes piled in the sink, takeout containers on the coffee table. I had not had the energy to clean up after myself. "Sit," Grace commanded, placing the casserole on the counter. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" "I do not remember," I admitted. As Grace bustled around my kitchen, warming up food and making coffee, I found myself telling her everything. The demands for money, the ultimatum about the house being escorted out of the wedding. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "They were talking about tricking me into signing over the house," I said, still unable to believe it. "My own son." Grace set a plate of food in front of me. "Eat," she said firmly. "Then we will talk." I had not realized how hungry I was until I started eating. Grace sat across from me, sipping her coffee, watching me with shrewd eyes. "My daughter did something similar," she said finally. "Not about a house, but she married a man who convinced her I was holding her back. They took nearly $30,000 from me, my life savings for a business venture that never existed. I did not see her for 8 years after that." I looked up, surprised. Grace had never mentioned this before. "What happened?" "Her marriage fell apart when the money ran out," Grace said matter-of-factly. "She came back not because she was sorry, but because she needed a place to stay. I took her in, but I set boundaries. Clear, firm boundaries." "Did it work?" I asked. "Eventually." Grace nodded. "It took time and there were setbacks, but she had to earn my trust back. I love her, but love without respect is meaningless." After Grace left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about what she had said. I had always given Thomas everything he wanted, rarely saying no, always putting his needs above my own. I had been trying to compensate for the loss of his mother, trying to be both parents at once. In doing so, I had raised a son who believed he was entitled to whatever he wanted, including my home. For the first time, anger began to replace the hurt. Not a hot, destructive anger, but a steady, clarifying one. I had allowed Thomas to treat me poorly, to take and take without giving back. That stopped now. The next day, I called my bank and my insurance company to check if there had been any unusual activity on my accounts. The bank representative sounded concerned. "Actually, Mr. Wilson, we did have a request to send some documents to a different address about 2 weeks ago. Someone called claiming to be you, asking us to mail some equity loan paperwork to an address in Lincoln Park." My blood ran cold. "I never requested that. We did not process it because the caller could not verify all your security information," the representative assured me. "But we made a note on your account." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Thomas had not just been talking hypothetically at the wedding. He had actively tried to access my home equity, likely planning to forge my signature. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. That afternoon, I made an appointment with a lawyer. It was time to protect myself, even if it meant protecting myself from my own son. Attorney Patricia Gonzalez's office was modest, but professional, located in a small building in downtown Chicago. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened carefully as I explained my situation. "Unfortunately, what you are describing is not uncommon," she said after I had finished. "Adult children feeling entitled to their parents' assets is something I see regularly. The attempted bank fraud, however, is very serious." "I do not want to press charges," I said quickly. "He is still my son." Patricia nodded, though her expression suggested she did not entirely agree with my decision. "At minimum, we need to secure your assets. I would recommend updating your will, placing the house in a trust with specific conditions, and setting up safeguards on all your accounts." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Patricia to reorganize my finances and legal affairs. We created a revocable trust for the house, updated my will, and placed security freezes on my credit. I took a week off work to go through every room in the house, documenting valuables and sentimental items, securing important papers. During this time, Thomas made no attempt to contact me. According to social media, he and Julie were honeymooning in the Maldives, their posts filled with pictures of luxury bungalows over crystal-clear water and champagne dinners on the beach. I wondered briefly how they were affording it, then remembered Julie's parents and their apparent willingness to fund their daughter's extravagant lifestyle. It was while sorting through old papers in my home office that I came across a file of newspaper clippings I had saved over the years. Stories about local community initiatives, charitable organizations, people making a difference in Chicago. Sarah had always been involved in community work before she got sick, volunteering at women's shelters and food pantries. It had been her way of giving back. One clipping in particular caught my attention. It was about a local organization that provided housing assistance and support for single parents. I remembered Sarah volunteering there several times, coming home with stories about the families she had met, the children she had played with, while their parents attended financial literacy classes or job interviews. An idea began to form in my mind, a way to honor Sarah's memory while also ensuring the house would always serve a purpose greater than being a cash cow for Thomas and Julie's lifestyle. The next day, I called the number on the old newspaper clipping, not expecting much. To my surprise, the organization's single-parent support network was still operating, though they had moved locations and expanded their services. "We always need more space for our programs," explained Diana Rodriguez, the executive director, when I met with her the following week. "Especially safe, comfortable spaces in good neighborhoods where families can feel welcome." I told her about my idea about Sarah's involvement years ago, about my desire to see the house used in a way that would help others. Diana listened with growing excitement. "A dedicated center for single parents in a residential setting would be amazing," she said. "We could offer classes, counseling, childcare, even temporary housing for families in transition." "But are you sure about this, Mr. Wilson? This is a significant decision." "I have never been more sure of anything," I replied. "But I do have some conditions." Together with Patricia and Diana, we drafted a plan. I would continue living in the house for now, but a portion would be immediately converted for use by the organization. Eventually, the entire property would transfer to the single-parent support network, though I would retain lifetime living rights. The organization would rename it the Sarah Wilson Family Center, ensuring Sarah's legacy would live on. There was one more condition written into the trust documents. If Thomas ever wanted to claim any portion of his inheritance, he would first need to complete 500 hours of volunteer service at the center. "It is not about punishing him," I explained to Patricia when she raised an eyebrow at this condition. It is about helping him understand the value of service, of thinking beyond himself. That is what his mother would have wanted for him. The local newspaper ran a small story about the planned center, complete with a picture of me standing in front of the house with Diana and several single parents from their current program. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive, with several local businesses offering to donate materials for the renovations. I was in the middle of clearing out the spare bedroom that would become the center's first counseling office when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. "Is this Marshall Wilson?" a woman's voice demanded when I answered. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Margaret Walker, Julie's mother," she said, her tone icy. "Would you care to explain why you are turning your house into some sort of charity case instead of helping your son and his new wife?" I took a deep breath. "Hello, Mrs. Walker. I am using my property as I see fit to honor my late wife's memory and to help families in need. This is clearly a spiteful move against Thomas and Julie," she snapped. "Harold and I have seen the newspaper. You are making Thomas look foolish by publicizing this right after the wedding." "That was not my intention," I said truthfully. "This decision is about Sarah's legacy, not about Thomas." "Well, they are cutting their honeymoon short to deal with this situation," she informed me. "Expect to hear from them and possibly our attorney." The call ended abruptly, leaving me shaken but resolute. I had anticipated resistance, but the speed and intensity of the response surprised me. I immediately called Patricia to warn her of potential legal action. "Let them try," she said confidently. "You have done nothing wrong, Marshall. The house is yours to do with as you please." Thomas and Julie arrived at my door 2 days later, both looking tanned from their tropical honeymoon, but with expressions of thunder. Julie was wearing designer sunglasses and an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Thomas wore an expensive suit as though he was attending a business meeting rather than visiting his father. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Thomas demanded the moment I opened the door. "No hello, no how are you?" "Hello, Thomas. Julie, would you like to come in?" I replied calmly, stepping aside. They stalked into the living room, Julie looking around with even more disdain than usual. There were now brochures for the Sarah Wilson Family Center on the coffee table and a framed sketch of what the renovated space would look like hanging on the wall. "You are turning our family home into a charity shelter," Thomas spat out. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It is not a shelter, it is a family support center," I corrected. "And there is nothing joking about helping single parents who are struggling, just as I struggled after your mother died." "This is obviously just to spite us," Julie interjected, removing her sunglasses to glare at me properly. "You would rather give the house to strangers than help your own son." "This decision honors your mother's memory, Thomas," I said, looking directly at my son. "She volunteered with this organization when you were very young. She believed in giving back." "Do not bring Mom into this," Thomas warned. "This is about you being selfish and vindictive." "Actually," I said, reaching for a folder on the side table, "I have something to show you." I opened the folder and laid out several documents, a copy of the trust agreement for the house, the updated will, and most damning, a letter from my bank documenting the fraudulent attempt to redirect equity loan paperwork. "What is this?" Thomas asked, though his suddenly pale face suggested he knew exactly what it was. "You tried to commit fraud, Thomas," I said quietly. "You tried to steal my house through deception. Did you really think I would not find out?" Julie picked up the bank letter, her eyes widening. "Thomas, what did you do?" "Nothing," he snapped, snatching the paper from her. "It was just an idea. I never went through with anything." "Because the bank caught it," I pointed out. "Not because you had a change of heart." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years when he was caught in a lie. Look, Dad. I was desperate. We needed that down payment. Needed or wanted, I asked. There is a difference. You have no idea the pressure I am under, Thomas shot back. Julie's parents expect certain things. They gave me a job, paid for most of the wedding. I need to show them I can provide the same lifestyle for Julie that they gave her. By stealing from your father, I asked. I was going to pay you back eventually, Thomas insisted. Once I got my bonus or made partner. Julie was looking between the documents and Thomas with growing horror. You said your father was going to give us the house, she accused. You said it was practically a done deal. I thought it would be, Thomas muttered. I did not think he would be this stubborn. Stubborn, I repeated. Thomas, this is theft and fraud we are talking about. I could press charges. You would not. Thomas scoffed, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. No, I would not. I agreed. Because despite everything, you are my son and I love you. But that does not mean there are no consequences for your actions. I explained the terms of the trust and the new will, how the house would eventually go to the Sarah Wilson Family Center, how Thomas's inheritance now had conditions attached. 500 hours of volunteer work, Thomas exclaimed when I got to that part. You cannot be serious. Completely serious, I replied. Consider it an opportunity to connect with the values your mother and I tried to instill in you. Julie had gone very quiet, staring at Thomas with an expression I could not quite read. When she finally spoke, her voice was like ice. You told me we would have a house by now. You promised me, Thomas. My parents bought us all that furniture for the condo we were supposed to be moving into. Julie, I can explain, Thomas began, but she cut him off. Explain what? That you lied, that you tried to commit fraud, that we are now stuck in that tiny apartment because your grand plan failed. She turned to me suddenly. Did you know he is already $30,000 in credit card debt, that he took out a personal loan to pay for my engagement ring, that he has been lying to my father about his sales numbers at work? I had not known any of this, and my shock must have shown on my face. That is enough, Julie, Thomas snapped. This is between my father and me. No, it is not, she retorted, grabbing her purse. Not anymore. Wait until my father hears about this. He vouched for you at the firm, Thomas. He put his reputation on the line. With that, she stormed out the front door, slamming behind her. Thomas and I stood in silence for a long moment. He looked deflated, younger somehow, the artificial confidence gone. She is going to leave me, he said finally, his voice small. You do not know that, I replied, though I suspected Julie was indeed headed straight to her parents to report everything. You have ruined everything, Thomas accused, anger returning. If you had just given us the house like a normal parent would, none of this would have happened. A normal parent, I repeated, incredulous. Thomas, normal parents do not give their children everything they demand. Normal parents teach values, responsibility, gratitude. Save the lecture, Thomas snarled, heading for the door. You will be hearing from my lawyer. I thought Julie's father was paying for everything, I said. Will he pay for a lawyer to help you sue your own father? Thomas had no answer for that. He left without another word, slamming the door, just as Julie had. I sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted, but oddly calm. For the first time since the wedding, I felt as though I had done the right thing. Not just for myself or for Sarah's memory, but even for Thomas. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is set boundaries and stick to them, no matter how painful. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. No lawsuit materialized from Thomas or the Walkers, though I did receive a tersely worded letter from an attorney warning me about potential defamation if I discussed Thomas's attempted fraud publicly. Patricia assured me it was an empty threat. The renovations on the house began in earnest. The spare bedroom was converted into a warm, welcoming counseling office. The basement was transformed into a classroom space for parenting classes and financial literacy workshops. I kept the master bedroom and kitchen for myself, but the dining room became a community gathering space with a large table where families could share meals. Diana introduced me to many of the families who would be using the center. Single mothers working multiple jobs to keep their children fed. Single fathers navigating a world that often overlooked their needs and challenges. Children who needed safe spaces and positive role models. I found myself sharing stories about raising Thomas alone, about the challenges and the joys. For the first time in years, I spoke openly about Sarah, about our life together, about the values she had tried to instill in our son. It was healing in a way I had not anticipated. News about the center spread, and donations began coming in. A local furniture store provided child-sized tables and chairs for the basement classroom. A bookstore donated shelves of children's books. A tech company gave computers for a small lab where parents could work on resumes or take online classes. Through it all, I heard nothing from Thomas. According to the local gossip network, which Grace kept me well informed of, Thomas and Julie were having serious marital problems. Julie's father had apparently demoted Thomas at work after discovering some financial irregularities. They had moved out of their apartment to a smaller place in a less prestigious neighborhood. I tried calling Thomas a few times, leaving voicemails offering to talk, but received no response. I sent cards for his birthday and for Christmas again, with no acknowledgement. It hurt, but I had come to accept that I could not control Thomas's choices. I could only control my own. The grand opening of the Sarah Wilson Family Center was held on what would have been Sarah's 60th birthday. The local newspaper sent a reporter, and several community leaders attended. I gave a short speech about Sarah's commitment to helping others, about how the center would continue her legacy of compassion and service. As I looked out at the gathered crowd, at the families who would benefit from the center, at the volunteers who had given their time and energy, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was right. This was good. This was what Sarah would have wanted. I did not see Thomas standing at the back of the crowd until after the ceremony. He looked different, thinner, his designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He hung back as people mingled, eating cake and touring the renovated spaces. When the crowd had thinned, he approached me cautiously, like a stray cat unsure of its welcome. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice subdued. "Thomas," I replied, surprised but trying not to show it. "I did not know you were coming." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I saw the notice in the paper. About the opening. About Mom." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. "The place looks nice. Different, but nice." "Thank you," I said. "Would you like a tour?" He nodded, and I led him through the renovated spaces, explaining the purpose of each room, the programs that would be offered. He listened without comment, his expression unreadable. When we reached the kitchen, now expanded to accommodate cooking classes, he finally spoke again. "Julie left me," he said abruptly, "right after we were at your house that day. She went straight to her parents and told them everything. About the debt, the fraud attempt, all of it." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. No matter what had happened between us, I had never wanted Thomas to be unhappy. "Her dad fired me the next day," Thomas continued. "Said I was lucky he was not pressing charges. I have been working at a car dealership in the suburbs, sales associate." His tone suggested this was a significant step down from his previous position, which it undoubtedly was. It is honest work, I offered. Thomas gave a short, humorless laugh. That is one way of looking at it. We moved to the living room, now set up as a waiting area with comfortable seating and toys for children. Thomas picked up a family photo I had placed on one of the side tables, Sarah and me with the 10-year-old Thomas between us, all of us smiling at the county fair. I really messed up, did not I? He asked quietly, still looking at the photo. Yes, I said honestly. You did. He set the photo down carefully. I was so focused on impressing Julie and her family, on being the kind of man they respected. I lost sight of everything else. Why are you here, Thomas? I asked gently. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. I do not know exactly. When I saw the article about Mom, about the center, I guess I realized what I had thrown away. Not just the relationship with you, but the values you and Mom tried to teach me. It is never too late to remember those values, I said. Is it too late for us? He asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, reminiscent of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. No, I said after a moment. But things cannot go back to the way they were before. There needs to be accountability, respect, boundaries. Thomas nodded slowly. The trust conditions. The 500 hours of volunteer work. That is one aspect, I agreed. But more importantly, you need to find your way back to being the person your mother and I raised you to be. Someone who values family over possessions, integrity over appearances, kindness over status. I would like to try, he said softly. I do not even recognize myself anymore, Dad. The things I did, the things I said to you, that is not who I want to be. It was a start, a small step on what would likely be a long road. But as we continued talking into the evening, I felt a cautious hope take root. Thomas asked about volunteer opportunities at the center. He shared more about his new job, how he was living simply and working to pay off his debts. He asked questions about the families who would be using the center, showing genuine interest in their stories. Over the following months, Thomas became a regular volunteer at the Sarah Wilson Family Center. He started with simple tasks, helping to paint classrooms and assemble furniture. Gradually, he began working directly with the families, using his business knowledge to teach basic financial literacy classes for parents. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, cautiously. There were setbacks, moments of tension, when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But there were also breakthroughs, like the day Thomas told me he had turned down a higher-paying job because it would have meant less time for volunteering. Some things are more important than money, he said, echoing words I had spoken to him countless times in his youth. A year after the center opened, Thomas completed his 500 volunteer hours. We celebrated with a small gathering at the center, where many of the families he had worked with came to thank him. I never expected this to change me, he admitted as we sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset, just as we used to do when he was a boy. I thought I would just put in the time and be done with it. And now, I asked. Now I understand what you and Mom were trying to teach me all along, he said. About what really matters. About the kind of legacy that truly lasts. He reached over and placed his hand on mine, a gesture of connection that spoke volumes. Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad, he said quietly. Even when I gave you every reason to. As I looked at my son, I saw traces of the boy he had been, and glimpses of the man he was becoming. The journey had been painful, filled with hurt and betrayal. But sitting there together, I knew that the lesson had been worth the teaching, however difficult it had been. That is what parents do, I told him, squeezing his hand. We love, we teach, and sometimes we have to let our children fall so they can learn to stand on their own. The Sarah Wilson Family Center continues to thrive, helping dozens of families each year. Thomas is now on the board of directors, bringing his business acumen to help ensure its financial stability. He lives in a modest apartment nearby and recently started dating a kindergarten teacher who volunteers at the center on weekends. I still live in the house surrounded by the memories of Sarah and our life together. But now those memories share space with new ones. Children laughing in what was once our formal dining room, parents finding hope and support, where once there was only an empty nest, and a son who found his way back to the values that truly matter. What lesson have you learned about family that changed your perspective? Has someone ever taught you a valuable lesson about what truly matters in life? Share your stories in the comments below. Hit that like button if this resonated with you, subscribe to hear more of my experiences, and thank you for joining me on this journey of heartbreak and healing. Remember, sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most valuable truths.